So how's everybody doing? Welcome to the postseason or the wild card preview for the BTFL, the Best Team Football League. This is Hank, PR52. I'm here with Phil of Phil Talk Sports and Nick from the Charger Dude 95 YouTube channel. He's the guy who created the Dream Season Football League or the DSFL. How is everybody doing? How are you guys doing today?
Doing good, man. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm doing good as well, man. Thank you.
All right, no worries. So, this is the preview for the wild card round of the BTFL. I was gonna say DSFL. That'd be awesome if I had created that series. But this is the preview for the Best Team Football League series that I have been uploading with the help of Nick and Phil and DJ, Josh, and Ricky when they've had a chance or been able to do it. Sorry, I live next to an airport, so that's why there's you can hear the airplane go overhead. But anyway, we are going to do the preview for the wild card and the postseason in general. Nick and Phil are going to give their insights into who they believe will win the BTFL Tecmo Bowl Championship. We're going to start with a few of the teams that did not make the postseason. We're not able to make it. Those would be the Redskins, the 91 Redskins, the 98 Vikings. What was it? The Vikings, the Redskins, the 02 Bucks, thank you, Nick. The 02 Bucks, the 98 Broncos, as well as the 2012 Texans and the 99 Jaguars. Guys, why do you guys think some of those teams were not able to make it?
I'll go first. So, by the way, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to see how the postseason pans out, the BTFL, and I think that overwhelmingly the teams that made the postseason, the top 12, were indeed probably the top 12 teams, but I could make a case that the 1999 or 91 rather Washington Redskins were maybe the best team, not only to not make it, but really the best team that never is really talked about as the greatest single season team ever. I mean, they have a very strong case to being the greatest single season team of all time. They went 14-2. Their real 1991 year, of course, 9-7 in the BTFL. They had the best scoring offense. They had one of the best offenses for a year ever. Hard to believe that when Joe Theismann is the notable quarterback, and he was years earlier under the tutelage of maybe one of the greatest coaches people don't talk about ever, in Joe Gibbs. He's not a Bill Walsh or Bill Belichick or Vince Lombardi, but Joe Gibbs is right there as one of the greatest coaches in the history of the NFL. And the Redskins were also a very suffocating defense. They were second in the league in scoring in that 91 year. I mean, it's funny because this team, outside of Darryl Green, you really don't think about as any notable players on the roster. This probably, if there is any team in NFL history that's the epitome of a team with no big superstars, the 99 or 91 Redskins were it. And to me, it's a huge surprise that they didn't make it, but they were very, very close. And it just speaks to volumes about just how competitive the BTFL was.
Well, also you have to realize that the best passer or the passing leader in the BTFL in yards was actually Mark Rippon. He actually had the most passing yards in the season, and I think he had the three best receivers in Art Monk and Ricky Sanders and Gary Clark. So they were pretty amazing as they were, and Darryl Green had the most interceptions. He was the interception leader, and this was one of the three teams that had Matt Millen on it. The failed Lions GM, Matt Millen. What about?
Go ahead. The funny thing is, just to tag along to your Mark Rippon point, the funny thing is, he, of course, was not a Hall of Fame quarterback.
No.
He just made one Pro Bowl. That was that year. But he actually held out all of training camp and all of the preseason. He didn't really step on the field until week 1 of the year. He tore the defenses to shreds that year, and, of course, the BTFL too.
Phil, what about your Bucks?
I was gonna say that's definitely a team I could speak on. Calling a lot of their games. That was a team I loved, to watch growing up. And the funny thing, when you do a project in a league like this, is sometimes you can get into the playoffs off of talent alone. But when you're going to do a league based on the greatest teams of all time, every team top to bottom is going to have talent. And at the end of the day, the Bucks just ended up in the wrong division, where two other division rivals, made the playoffs, and the Saints and the Panthers. The Panthers, had the number 2 seed, and any Bucks game that I called, which was a lot of fun, by the way, being involved in this. I've enjoyed a lot getting to call games, but the Bucks, you would think a team with Mike Allstott would have really good red zone numbers, but I think they settle for field goals way too often. The Panthers outclassed them in both meetings. The Saints not too far off, so I think the Bucks were a talented team. They just were in the wrong division at the wrong time.
And the other thing is the fact that I think it was the other Nick that we have doing the Green Bay Packers game. He was going to pull a chiseled Adonis after Martin Gramatica kept missing field goals. Put your motherfucking head down. No. Or he said something like it's illegal to make field goals in Tampa or something like that. But that was a team that started out 0-2. I think something like that. 1-1 or 0-2. And they actually ended up doing pretty well. I think they swept the AFC. Besides the Dolphins, they swept and the Bills. So they beat the Patriots and the Jets, the 2 teams in the playoffs. To me, the biggest surprise team that did not make it in this whole thing was the 98 Vikings. And strangely enough, the reason why they did not make it was because, just like Chris Berman said in Week 17 of the 1998 season, you got to score more points. We need more points. They couldn't score enough points, and they couldn't beat the Bears. So it was unfortunate for them, and such a talented team with guys like Randall Cunningham, Randy Moss, Chris Carter. So many great players on that team just were not able to make it. And then notably, the team, another team that didn't make it was the 2012 Houston Texans, who were in it all the way up until Week 17. They needed to beat the Colts, which the Jaguars eliminated themselves by losing to the Titans, Steve McNair and the Titans. They could have gotten into the playoffs at 7-7-2. They had 2 ties, and they weren't able to make it because they lost to the Colts and ended up going 6-7-2. So, yeah, I mean, it just goes to show that, sometimes you play well, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you start out well, sometimes you got a good record, but it's not how you start, it's how you finish. So, we're going to go into the matchups of the BTFL. If you guys want to bring up the stat sheets, I'm going to bring those up on the screen so that everyone who is watching us can view the stat sheets for the teams that we're talking about. So the first game that we're going to talk about, and we're going to kind of analyze, is a game between 2 teams that did not play this season, but these 2 teams, not the actual 2 teams, but they once played in Super Bowl III, that being the 68 Jets versus the 06 Indianapolis Colts. Both teams 9-7, Colts 4th place, Jets 5th place. And I want to know from you guys, first of all, which team you think is going to win, and second of all, which team, or second of all, like, how you think that they're going to win the game. You look at the Colts, a team that had a very quick start. They were 7-2 at one point, and then they only won 2 games after that in the last 7 games. And the Jets, who have been consistent the whole time. Let's start with Phil this time. What do you think?
It is funny how these are the ones playing in this wild card matchup. we'll have to give the edge to the Colts. As you said, they started off, kind of hot and cooled off a little bit, but it seems whenever these teams play, the Jets have the upper hand, and maybe it's a basic way to look at it, but I think the Colts might be due. Like, his stats finally came up here. But I think Peyton Manning's offense, he only threw 5 picks the whole year. Joe Namath not far behind him with 6. But I would definitely give the Colts the offensive advantage because, like you said, you got to score more points than the other team. So I would go with the Colts in this one.
Okay. Well, this matchup, of course, is interesting. I actually think, ironically, the Colts may have been better served having that team that, of course, lost to the Jets in Super Bowl III, the 68 version, because Baltimore for that year was maybe the greatest single-season defense ever. The Colts in 2006, make no mistake, are a solid defense, but are not getting mistaken with the Hall of Famers that were on that team. With that said, the Jets, because of their less than desired rushing performances throughout the year, I think that the Jets really cannot capitalize in this game on the really lackluster defense that is the Colts in defending the run. I mean, in 2006, all year they were getting really punched in the mouth defensively with strong run games, but the Colts still managed a Super Bowl win. And I think these Jets with Emerson Boozer, less than 4 yards a run, less than 3.5 yards a run. Those are about the numbers he put up in 1968. The Jets are a bottom 3 run game overall. Boozer somehow made the Pro Bowl with those lackluster numbers in 1968. With that said, I just think the Jets will really struggle offensively, being as one-dimensional as they may end up being in this football game, and that should allow Peyton Manning and company to really flourish if the Jets are unable to move the ball. So I think Indianapolis will win this game.
Okay, cool. I think that those are both really good predictions, and it definitely shows a lot of insight. One thing you should definitely say about the Colts that season was the fact that, strangely enough, was the one season where they lost to, I think they lost to every team in their division, including the first loss they ever sustained to the Houston Texans with Ron Dane at running back for the Houston Texans, if I remember it correctly. The Colts were one of the better offenses in the league, or in the BTFL. Defense, not so good. Jets are definitely more rounded, but obviously the Colts should be favored in this game because of where they're standing and because of the fact that they'll be at home. Well, kind of. All right, so the next game we're going to talk about is Saints-Packers. Now, these two teams played each other in Week 7. This was a game, if you guys don't remember, this was a game that kind of went back and forth. It was a turnover fest in the first half and in the second half. Pierre Thomas ended up getting injured, and he was replaced by a famous Arizona running back, Mike Bell. And it was one of those games where if Green Bay was able to capitalize on a fumble return by Reggie White, they probably would have won the game. Brett Favre tries to throw deep to Keith Jackson, and he's unable to get into the end zone as time expires. So it's the third-seeded Packers at 11-5, barely missed the second seed after losing to the Panthers and losing to the Vikings, of course. And then the Saints were 5th place, 10-6. They swept the Panthers, the first seed, but they were unable to win the division. So we'll start off with Nick this time. Which team do you think will win, and why do you think they're going to win it?
Well, if Pierre Thomas is on the field for some reason, and I understand that he had a nice year in 2009, but he looked like Walter Payton in the BTFL. His numbers are outrageous: 220 runs, 13 under 3 yards, 12 touchdowns. That you put up against a Walter Payton, Gale Sayers, I don't know who's playing in this game, but he is about as good as there is in the BTFL, and that certainly should be a tough-to-stop run game, ironically, for Green Bay. Now, the Packers were a very good defense in 1996 and in the BTFL too, but the Saints are every bit an offense that can beat them. this ironically, with the way the Tecmo Bowl works, is a home game for New Orleans, even though they are the lower seed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Saints, with as good as they are running the ball in the BTFL and a very stingy defense with Vilma leading the way 28 sacks, this does not appear to be as lopsided a matchup as you would probably see on paper. But with that said, I have raved about the Saints. Gut feeling I take Green Bay in this game, in large part due to just how excellent Green Bay's quarterback has been this year, Brett Favre. 18 TDs and just 6 picks.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting with these teams, like in reality and in games we've seen, these are two, NFC powerhouses that never really get to play each other in these big games. They're kind of, ships passing in the night. They are never good at the same times. It seems we've never gotten a really big Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers matchup or Brett Favre matchup for that matter. And you look at the yards that Brett Favre has put up, but it's only equated to, the 24th ranked offense. So it's a lot of yards. You already mentioned Pierre Thomas, 1,300 rushing yards. He's one of the, I don't know how many running backs broke the 1,000-yard mark in this league in this season, but it's not many in our league here. So it's very hard to tell. I think that ground control will help the Saints overall, and I'll go with New Orleans in a nail biter.
Yeah. So Nick, you both picked the Saints, right?
No, I picked the Packers.
The Packers.
Gut feeling.
The Packers.
Even though the Saints are every bit as good as them.
They are. And Pierre Thomas, he is a bit of a surprise because, you would expect him to be like a moderately ranged running back, better than average. I think it was something like, if I could look it up right now, I think there were a total of 10 running backs. Barry Sanders, Mike Garrett, Marshall Faulk, Pierre Thomas, Walter Payton, Arian Foster, Emmett Smith, Marshawn Lynch, Pierre Thomas, and Jamal Lewis, who had over 1,000 yards. So 10 running backs with over 1,000 yards in the BTFL. And you wouldn't really expect it on his end, but I think the one knock on the Packers is Drew Brees' health, because he got injured twice. And of course, Brett Favre is the Iron Man. He can't get injured. There's no possible way. But these two teams are very, in my opinion, very evenly matched. Very evenly matched.
Yeah, easy to say that. I just think Green Bay, and listen, I mean, I'm tossing a turn about whether the Saints could win this game, but I think some of the production for the Saints running the ball seems to me that probably would not translate to the playoffs, because I think if in the real matchup with the Saints and the Packers, if you take maybe the best ever Packer defense for a season with Reggie White, a Hall of Famer, Kuntz, Leroy Butler, Eugene Robinson, and that excellent Packer defense against the Saints, where you mentioned Brees a bit hurt, but largely they're somewhat one-dimensional. I think in a real matchup, Green Bay would do a very good job of shutting them down. Hard to see the Saints getting shut down like that, but if any team could do it, it would be the Packers in that defense.
And also understand that the Saints are on a bit of a fall, because at first they were winning the division. You can make a strong case that they would win the division, but obviously Carolina played better. I think they have a more talented team. It's just a shame that they were unable to beat the Saints during the regular season. And the Packers, they basically ran away with this division. I know that it was close at the end, but starting in week 4, they ran away with it. I think they only lost 2 straight twice. So they did very well with that. So the next matchup that we are going to talk about is going to be we'll do the Seahawks and Bears. So the 9-7 Bears, 9-7 Seahawks, 4th place and 6th place respectively. This is one on the screen. It should say 6th place in the NFC. So I made a bit of a mistake there, but it's cool. So two teams that you would expect to be prolific defenses. Really, the Seahawks kind of got in from the skin of their teeth because if they had lost, the Rams would have made it at 8-8. And the Bears, it was a winner-take-all against the Vikings. It was very exciting, commentated by Nick.
Oh,
in that prime time,
in
that it was, but in that primetime slot, where the Bears had to kind of overcome the odds because they had a losing record at midseason and they had lost Jim McMahon at one point. But the Seahawks kind of stayed consistent. Their division was by far the worst division in the BTFL. Got kind of a scare at the end after Russell Wilson got injured for 2 games, and Tavares Jackson actually did decent in reserve for him, won 2 out of 3 games. But we'll start out with Phil again. Who do you think is going to win? And the question is why you think they're going to win.
Well, if you told me that before the season you picked Seattle Seahawks to be the number 1 offense in this league, I'm calling you a liar because nobody sees that coming, but it is in fact. So Seattle with that number 1 offense, even though Russell Wilson here has 13 interceptions on the year, I'm going with the Bears for one reason only. Every time we've done these fantasy leagues, which I've done with Nick multiple times, the Bears do well, and I don't have the heart to pick against them. I think Jim McMahon and crew are going to pull ahead, and I can't pick the Bears, especially this early in the playoffs.
Yeah, Phil's alluding to the Dream Season Football League series with Barger Dude 95's YouTube page. I've done a couple of these, and it's ironic because the 3 seasons that have gone from start to finish, Chicago has been the champion of the NFC every single time. And the Bears, I would throw out the defensive numbers for this team. When they played, as Hank mentioned, the regular season finale against Minnesota, not only was it not competitive, but the Bears defense, I mean, they basically, I don't know if they allowed a first down in the game. The Vikings were that shut down by the Chicago Bears. And then you mentioned Walter Payton has had an excellent year, over 6 yards a run, 17 touchdowns. That's ridiculous. Hank, maybe you could search up some stats real quick. Is that the most running touchdowns in the league? It looks like
17,
it.
17 was the most, and it was tied with Mike Garrett. Also had 17.
So weird. But, we'll talk about Kansas City and Mike Garrett next.
And McMahon did passing, if that tells you anything.
Wow. Yeah. So the 26th overall defense, it's ironic. I think both of these defenses will probably play about the same in this game. Seattle's 19th, which doesn't make much sense either. But I think, Chicago wins this game. They're at home. The defense is solid. They're playing their best football of the year right now. And you just look at the numbers of 29 sacks for Richard Dent, 23 for Mike Singletary. The sack numbers in the Tecmo Bowl are a bit inflated, but that does speak to just how good those guys were. And the Chicago Bears should win this game somewhat handedly, actually.
All right. Phil, what do you think?
I think part of my prediction is I did watch the 85 Bears 30 for 30 a little too recently. So I'm feeling positive. But again, I can't go against the Bears when you have Walter Payton, Jim McMahon. Like Nick said, I would throw out the defensive statistics because when it's time to play, as it was against the Vikings, the Bears were able to turn it on, and I have them winning. Maybe not a landslide victory like it was against Minnesota, but I think they do enough to get the job done.
Okay. The other thing is the fact that Willie Gault, he had 725 receiving yards. The funny thing is that he also got injured twice as a kick returner because at the beginning of the season they put him at kick returner, and he probably could have had more yardage than that. Even Jim McMahon, he got injured as well, and Mike Tomczak had to play. But you look at the defensive numbers of the Chicago Bears. They were even though their defensive numbers are low, they did do well not allowing points. They did do well forcing turnovers. I think sacks. Yeah, I think that Seattle's defensive numbers are a bit underwhelming, but one of the reasons for their number 1 offense was because of their running game. you add a guy like Russell Wilson into the mix, and I know I didn't put this on there, but I think Russell Wilson had something like 400 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. So that's another kind of wrinkle to their system, with the fact that they had a mobile quarterback that was able to score points. And even Seattle had a lot of sacks as well. Not as many as Chicago, but Richard Sherman was good, as was Cam Chancellor, the Chancellor of the Legion of Boom. But so you both are going with the Bears on this one.
Yeah, we could go ahead and repair the Seahawks' reputation a bit right here. I mean, the part that we can give them credit for, they're the 29th pass defense in the BTFL. They did play in a division with Joe Montana and the Niners, Kurt Warner and the Rams, Kurt Warner and the Cardinals.
Exactly.
So that isn't exactly a passing game 6 games out of the year that they can take any break on.
And they only lost 2 of those games.
Wow.
They lost in week 16 to the Rams, and they lost their first matchup against the Cardinals, which ironically, Phil can attest to this, but Kurt Warner did not play that whole game. They effectively lost to Matt Leinart.
Yeah, you can't take that away from them. Matt had to have the greatest, second half of his life, and made it happen.
And he won. I think he won 2 games. He finished that game and won another game, and then lost a game, and then Kurt Warner took over. Which the Cardinals, it was funny there. They won their first 2 games, and then they didn't win for like 7 or 8 weeks. So it's kind of strange for them. They lost to the Cowboys, and they only looked down. So the final matchup. This is the only matchup currently in the playoffs between 2 division opponents who played each other 2 times. The first time the Raiders won 24-0. This is the game that I dubbed the flea flicker game, because one of the plays in the Kansas City Chiefs playbook, one of the things that I did was if your team lost 2 or 3 consecutive games, usually I tried to meddle with your playbook or your the depth chart, and I ended up thinking to myself, I think it was with the Bills, I was like, I'm going to try to do a double revert or a jet sweep double reverse thing with Andre Reed, and that didn't work. And then I was like, I'm going to try a flea flicker for the Chiefs, and that definitely didn't work because the flea flicker was responsible for 3 interceptions and one of the reasons why the Chiefs completely bombed in the game. And then in the second game, I think it was week 14, the Chiefs and the Raiders, they kept the game tight. Mike Garrett was the lone rusher for the Kansas City Chiefs. He scored a touchdown, but the Raiders eventually won the game. Ken Stabler did not start out the season. Mike Ray actually started out the season, and he started out the season really well, winning 2 out of 3 games or 3 out of 4 games. And then Ken Stabler took over. So, gonna ask I'll ask Phil this time. Who do you think is gonna win this game and why between the 69 Chiefs and the 76 Oakland Raiders?
I need one quick fact check. So was Mike Garrett, did he lead the league in rushing with his 1467? Is he the rushing leader?
No, Barry Sanders was.
Okay.
I believe, TDs, he was the best. Barry Sanders was the rushing champion with 1,626 total rushing yards for that Lions team that was not very good.
Well,
He was like the Natron. He was like the Natron Means of the Detroit Lions.
Don't do that. I thought we were gonna go through this whole show with that.
But no, it's good to see that in a league like this where numbers can get inflated and deflated, that sometimes things just ring true, and one is being that Barry Sanders, doesn't matter what team he's on, he is, the greatest running back of all time. But obviously Mike Garrett, no slouch here with his 1467 and his 17 touchdowns, and it kind of, evened out the Len Dawson play that I'll call, almost the dictionary definition of average, as he only threw one more touchdown than interception with a 14 to 13 ratio. And because of that inconsistency and that over reliance on the run, I will go with the Raiders here due to the fact that they seem to be the more overall balanced team. They're the 10th offense, 13th best defense, whereas the Chiefs reside in the late 20s or in the early 20s in both categories. I did call a Raiders game against the Eagles, and while the Eagles did best them, I did see some sparks to the Raiders. With guys like Fred Biletnikoff, there's a reason there's a college award named after him. He can beat you deep whenever necessary. So I will go with Oakland in this game.
Okay.
Len Dawson, I mean, such underwhelming stats. He's completing 43.5% of his passes. I mean, if the Chiefs, bottom 3 passing game of the BTFL, can't really move the chains through the air, how are they going to stop a team in the Raiders who might just be one of the best run defenses in all of football? And that should nullify the 17 TDs and the excellent performance that Mike Garrett should have. So, I mean, I'm with you. This is a road game for the Raiders, but I think Oakland wins this game as well. Hard to beat a team 3 times, which does give the Chiefs somewhat of a chance, but I still believe Oakland wins this game.
And
that's a good one, yeah.
And an underrated stat definitely is the fact that this Chiefs team was one of the – it doesn't say it on the stat sheet. Okay, this is one of those things where it doesn't say it on the defensive stat sheet. But when it came to sacks, the Chiefs were one of the best. Buck Buchanan, Willie Lanier, Emmett Thomas was great at interceptions. Jim Kearney or Kearney, I don't know the pronunciation of his name, but they were very good at sacking the quarterback. And this was a Chiefs team that this Raiders team was the only team in their division that they ever lost to. So, and of course, the one guy you can't blink at, Cliff Branch, leading receptions in the BTFL at 60. If I look at the numbers thus far when it comes to receiving, I don't think that there was even a receiver that got even close. I think George Sauer of the New York Jets had 45, and that was 15 away. And I think he led the league. Wow. I think he might have led the league in touchdown receptions. With tied with Willie Gault, Chris Carter, and David Givens. Tom Brady threw the ball to David Givens in the end zone just about every game. I think I said David Givens, all the Givens you could get, almost every episode. So that's how that's looking there. And, of course, the only knock on the Raiders, is the fact that
they're the worst run game in football.
Well, they are the worst run game in football, but they ended the season losing 3 consecutive games to the Eagles, to the Chargers, and they also lost to, trying to look for it, they also lost to the Cowboys. So 3 consecutive losses to end the season. And you know what they say about going into the playoffs? Usually if you roll into the playoffs like the Raiders did, they had a chance, right? They had a chance to get that second seed, but they were unable to capitalize, losing to 2 teams that, it was meaningless. They were just basically playing for pride, and losing to an Eagles team that was playing all of their backups. So it's just one of those things where it's not great. Good.
I mean, I did the Chargers-Raiders game down the stretch of that year. San Diego not only won, but they were up by 2 touchdowns the majority of that game, and I think in large part it was due to, as I alluded to a moment ago, the worst rushing attack in football. And Kansas City is one of the best at stopping the run. They have Hall of Famers in just about every level of that defense, is especially up front with Willie Lanier and Buck Buchanan. They can rush the passer, but most significantly, they are big. They are strong for their era. The Kansas City Chiefs were up front, and they could really stop the run. And I think the line of scrimmage battle, which probably will be won by Kansas City, should make it pretty tough for Ken Stabler, who didn't play a whole season, to play well and beat this Chiefs defense through the air. I think I take the Raiders. It's going to be very close, given that the Raiders will probably be one-dimensional again.
Yeah. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show the second-place teams and the first-place teams, and I guess we'll get our opinions on, what could possibly happen here. These teams aren't going to play each other in the playoffs unless they both make it to the Super Bowl. So I'm just going to put them on the screen and give our gut impressions on how we feel about them going into the playoffs. First and foremost, I'm showing this right now. During the Week 17 game between the Patriots and the Jets, where the Jets made it into the playoffs, they were playing at the same time as the Raiders, so they weren't really sure because it's a points thing. The Patriots scored more points despite losing to the Raiders. Tom Brady got injured and was replaced by Rohan Davey. And despite the fact that Rohan Davey played a pretty good game, okay, in a loss to the Jets, they have 1 week to rest up Brady. And I don't know if he's going to come back. This is the question mark. I don't know who's going to come back from injuries in this situation. So, is Tom Brady going to come back for this game? And if he does, if he doesn't, how is that going to impact the Patriots? What are they going to have to do? Because Rohan Davey never started a game in the NFL. And that's a big thing right there. And as for Cam Newton, looking up the stat sheet, Cam Newton definitely a candidate to be the MVP of the league, which I think he had the most touchdowns during the season with 26. So, Nick, looking at these two teams right here, what is your gut reaction about how they could play during the playoffs?
My gut reaction, Tom Brady on or not, it is ironic to see the Patriots. They were a great defensive team in 2004, but this seems just an incredible defense in comparison to the other teams in the league. You would think across the BTFL there are clubs outside of Pittsburgh that have a better defense than the Patriots, but they were second in the league. Brady in or Brady out, they relied on that defense just about all year. But to me, New England, I think the 2007 version was better, and I think this version is just my gut instinct, my gut opinion. Mm-hmm. They're playoff bound, but they are a pretty weak 10-6 team with a run game that's one of the worst in football. The Patriots don't have any sensational players outside of a guy that just made the Hall of Fame in Ty Law. He had 5 interceptions in the BTFL. So I think the Patriots could have some problems whoever they play in the divisional round. And as for Carolina, as you mentioned, it was a one-man wrecking crew with Cam Newton. I mean, the man was sensational. I don't know how many rushing scores he had, but it must have been at least 4 or 5 that Russell Wilson had for Seattle. And the Panthers were also a very good defense. And doing a couple of the Carolina games, the Panthers look like one of the best teams in the NFC. And
Cam with 8.
They are deserving of an 11-5 record, and I think they will be a tough out for whoever they play.
Cam with 8 touchdowns.
Yeah. Maybe the MVP of the league.
Quite possibly. The only number I think that Phil alluded to during the intro was his interceptions.
But, I mean, 8 touchdowns will help counteract that a little bit.
Exactly.
That's context to it, no doubt.
And how do you see these two teams who are not playing each other right now? Your eyes might be deceiving you. How do you think they're going to play during the season or during the playoffs?
Okay, here's the scoop, and I'm going to tell you. This is the 2004 Patriots.
Yes.
Or as I like to call them, this is peak Spygate Patriots.
Oh,
that whether Brady is good to go or not, I think Belichick's got another one growing in a lab somewhere. So I would be safe to say that Tom Brady will be ready to go. I mean, if something by the name of, what was it, Johan Davey? Was that the other quarterback?
Rohan Davey.
Rohan, excuse me.
Yeah.
If he is, they might be in trouble. But assuming Tom Brady's ready to go, I would take the Patriots in this one, although the offense is abysmal, whether he plays or not, being 30th ranked in the league. The Panthers, they've always, realistically or not, real life or not, they are a big show-out regular season team. They've never shown the ability, despite being in 2 Super Bowls, they've never really seen the ability to make it happen in the playoffs. So obviously the Patriots limped into the playoffs, but they are there, and that's usually all it takes for them to make noise. So I will go with the 04 Patriots moving forward if they eventually have to play each other, obviously.
So Pittsburgh Steelers, if you see a guy named Matt Walsh, don't let him in the stadium because he's probably got the binoculars. So, yeah, I mean, you look at this Panthers team, they were amazing in 2015. They were the only team that was able to beat them during the regular season was the Falcons, and that was a shootout. I think the score was 34-28 or something like that. It was like overtime, and Julio just had an amazing game. But yeah, I mean, these two teams played each other during the season, and Nick commentated on it, and I think both teams had 6 turnovers apiece, or 6 turnovers altogether. So, and it wasn't just the Patriots turning the ball over. When the game happened, it was Tom Brady threw a pick, and then Cam threw a pick. And Tom Brady threw a pick, and then Cam threw a pick. Then Tom Brady fumbled, and then they tried to get into Patriots territory, and Cam threw an end zone interception. If these two teams have to go up against each other, sure, the Patriots might win, but the Panthers are pretty good, and they didn't have Devin Funchess for a lot of the season, but, this is probably the top 3 wide receiving tandems in the BTFL. Better than even the Rams with Hakeem and Bruce and Holt. So these two teams definitely put on the pain during the season. And I would say the Patriots' offensive numbers are not so good, but understand they've got Tom Brady, so they can still do anything. Anything's possible for them. So the final 2 teams, which are the 2 first-place teams, both of them 14-2 during the BTFL. There's apparently a lot of Pennsylvania bias in the BTFL with the person who hacked these ROMs. It wasn't me, but the Steelers and the Eagles, obviously, they locked up home field advantage in week 15 and spent week 16 and 17 with their backups in, and their backups actually played pretty well. One thing that's not really on the screen is the fact that the Steelers only had 3 total interceptions in the BTFL. Just 3. And I think when you look at fumble or total turnovers, it was definitely less than 6. So they didn't turn the ball over a lot, and they scored a lot of points. And of course, you look at I think Phil will get into that, or Torrey Smith and Alshon Jeffrey when he talks about what's going on there. So Nick, what do you think of these 2 teams right here?
Well, I was just going to add something that's pretty interesting. First, before I get into these 2, we talked about Carolina. Mm-hmm. The Panthers, 3 of the 4 teams that they would play in the NFC in the divisional round are ridiculously talented defenses. Mm-hmm. Seahawks, Packers, Bears. Saints, not so much, so that could be a game, a familiar division opponent that Carolina could win easily. But I think the Panthers, if they play those 3 defenses, that'll be a very, very tough matchup. Pittsburgh, they most likely, I would say, are the best team in football. Phil may have a different opinion, but the BTFL was really dominated all year by the Steelers. I mean, they were at one point, Hank, I believe 12 or 13-0. Mm. Their losses were down the stretch playing backups. So they were, from both sides of the ball, an incredibly dominant unit. Joe Green, 55 sacks. That just doesn't make any sense. those are video game numbers. Is this a video game? I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Terry Bradshaw was sensational. I mean, he might as well have been the MVP of the league because given his role, he played it as good as anybody. I mean, it's a game manager. He did a terrific job of taking what the defense gave him and didn't make any big mistakes all year. This team is incredible, and they are as advertised. And Phil, I'll leave the Eagles breakdown to you.
Well, before I get to that, I will obviously talk about the Steelers first. And the number that jumps out at me here is the fact that Terry Bradshaw, as good as he is as good as most people would proclaim him to be, to only throw 2 interceptions in the way that he normally would play the game. And sure, I could fit it in that window type of style. I don't know if it's something he's taking or something that he stopped taking, but he's because it is, with the 14-2 record, you can't argue with the number 1 defense in the league, which is nothing out of the ordinary for Pittsburgh. But you do look at that team, and Terry Bradshaw's playing the best football in his life with those video game numbers. The whole world's a simulation, after all. But you got a guy like Franco Harris who gets it done on the ground. There's Hall of Famers all over this offensive and defensive sides of the football. It is hard to not see the Steelers steamroll through the AFC. There might be a handful of teams that would have to give them hiccups. Like you said, their only losses was when wins were not an issue.
Oh, and they lost to the Packers. They won Week 17, but they lost to the Packers when it did matter. But they were so far ahead that it was one of those like throwaway losses,
Right. So it wasn't something that really affected them in the long run. Obviously, they're sitting here with the number 1 seed. Looking over to Philadelphia, obviously I called not every game of their season, but more than I didn't. And the one thing going through the year, obviously with their record, defense playing great, top 3, offense roughly middle of the pack as we have here with 16th. Carson Wentz had an interception problem early in the year. He definitely figured that out towards the end. There was a while where it was clearly one pick a game. He did settle that down, and he had a good plus 10 ratio here on his touchdown interceptions. Jay Ajayi went off when needed. The exuberance of Torrey Smith having the career of his life, if you took the names away, those definitely seem like numbers that would have belonged to Alshon Jeffrey here. They had the same amount of receptions, 19 on the year, and Torrey Smith had almost exactly 300 more yards and 4 more touchdowns. So Torrey Smith, obviously the go-to man in this version of the Super Bowl champion Eagles. My biggest concern calling a lot of these games is the kicking game was shaky at best. Jake Elliott, as I mentioned, with Carson Wentz throwing a pick a game early on and then figuring it out. Jake Elliott misses about a field goal a game, if not more, and he hasn't figured it out yet. He has been Cody Parking a few. He hits the upright way too many times. Sometimes it bounces right in. More times than not, it's been bouncing left and out. So that is the biggest hole. If the Eagles get in a dogfight, sometimes it comes down to your kicking game, and that is their biggest question.
So this was Jake Elliott's kicking percentage, 14 for 25, with kicking 40 for 40 extra points. And remember, extra points are from the 13-yard line.
Right.
So it's not like a kick from the 2-yard line. It's a kick from that the ball is snapped from the 13-yard line. But like Phil says, he struggled with kicks. He struggled mightily with kicks. But actually, Jake Elliott was the 14th best scorer in the BTFL, which is crazy with how many kicks he missed.
Yeah, that definitely puts into account the amount of points that the Eagles scored. Obviously, he could have been number 1 if his percentage was well above average, I would say. So that is, again, my biggest gripe with this team. Obviously, the offense has played well enough. The defense has played superb. And the kicking game is really where I would have the most questions for this game.
Before we move on and we talk about the who we think is going to be in the Tecmo Super Bowl, the BTFL Tecmo Super Bowl, how do you think benching their starters for 2 weeks will impact the Steelers and the Eagles? I think the Steelers quarterback was Mike Kruzek. I think Phil might know who that is. Wasn't he like a famous UCF coach or something like that?
He was the first coach of UCF football. Yes,
yeah,
correct.
Mike Kruzek, who was the backup quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who filled in very, very fine. He played well against the Texans, and he played well against the Browns. And then Nick Foles, who was the Super Bowl 52 MVP for the Eagles. And the only reason why that wasn't the starter was because he didn't start out the season. He started the last 6 games of the season. Phil, how do you think that this is going to impact them in the playoffs, in the divisional round, or in the future games, or do you think it won't really affect them that much?
I mean, I think to some degree rest can be a good thing. Obviously, I think when you put your backups in and you're not really competitive, that can get in your head because winning is contagious, so is losing. So if you're putting your backups in and you're just losing games because you're starting to play scared before the playoffs even begin, that's an issue. But obviously, when your backup is a Super Bowl MVP, you don't really miss a beat there. So I think the Eagles kept the momentum going with those backups. I don't think it's going to be that much of an issue. And a handful of those guys, Brent Stella, Corey Clement, and others, they played sparingly throughout the year. They just got, more playing time in those last 2 games. So if anything, they're going to be more ready than not if they're called upon, late in the playoff game. So I think overall, it just proves that everyone's ready. If you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And I think this Eagles team, top to bottom, due to those last 2 games where the backups played, could be the difference. I think they're ready to go.
Yeah. What
Yeah,
about you, Nick?
and the thing is, these teams were so much better than the next place in the AFC and NFC, respectively, that I don't think those backups will make that big of a difference. It could potentially, get get rid of some of the sharpness of the team when they play the divisional round. There may be more rust than usual, but just the class in which they defeated and dominated these teams, I don't see it be much of a problem. Pittsburgh and Philadelphia were the 2 best teams in the regular season in all the BTFL.
And it's crazy that the Steelers were the team that outclassed everybody on defense, and the Eagles were the team that usually outclassed teams on offense. Both teams played some games where, you could stop and say, well, this team, they're going to be in trouble in this game. There was one game where the Steelers were losing to the Colts into the 4th quarter before Peyton Manning threw a really bad interception to Mel Blount. And the Eagles were in a situation where they could have lost a few games, especially one in Week 1 against the Redskins, where they were losing 17-7 starting in the 4th quarter, and Carson Wentz led them back to be victorious. All right, so the moment we've all been waiting for. What 2 teams do you think are going to be in the BTFL Tecmo Super Bowl, and which one do you think will win? We'll start out with you, Nick.
All right, well, I'm going to try and predict all the games so that way I can figure out what matchups are happening. I think the Colts in the AFC, the Colts win and the Raiders win, which means that if we do the math here, the Raiders would play the Patriots and the Colts would play the Steelers. I think Pittsburgh would dominate that Indianapolis offense and the Steelers win, and then I think the Raiders would be a surprise team. I think of the BTFL, the Raiders would win, which means the Steelers and the Raiders would be the AFC Championship, and I have Pittsburgh. Meanwhile, in the NFC, I think the Bears beat the Seahawks and the Packers beat the Saints, which means the Bears would be the team that plays the Eagles, and it's the Seahawks that play the Panthers. As Phil alluded to, Carolina is a team that plays very, very well in the regular season. They may struggle in the playoffs. I think Seattle wins that game over Carolina. I think Philadelphia beats Chicago in a very close-knit football game. So the Eagles play the Seahawks, and I take Philadelphia. So the top 2 seeds would play, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and I have the Steelers.
Okay. Awesome. And Nick did a great job with that. I mean, he had all that right in front of him. I commend him for that. And
My head hurts.
And Phil, I don't know if you have the thing right in front of you. I can't really show it right now because it would give some of the games away.
Right. I mean, okay, so I had the Colts beating the Jets. I had the Saints beating the Packers. I had the Bears beating the Seahawks. Raiders beating the Chiefs. Fast forwarding a little bit, I would put the Raiders and Steelers more than likely in the AFC Championship game, and I would say the Bears and the Eagles in the NFC Championship game. So I think the thing with both these teams, the reason I put the two teams that are in front of us, Steelers and Eagles, in this Tecmo Super Bowl is because neither of them has really been tested, and they've played a lot of these teams already. So to play devil's advocate to Nick's prediction, I will go with the same two teams, but I will go with Philadelphia in the championship.
Okay, so Phil picks the Eagles, Nick picks the Steelers, same Super Bowl matchup. Just to finish this off, following up what Phil talked about before we go into how we felt being commentators for the BTFL. The Eagles were only tested once this season, and they were battle tested hard. Phil remembers these 2 weeks where the Eagles lost 2 consecutive games. One to the Broncos, where they lost 7-3, one of the most boring games in the BTFL. So boring that the halftime stats were a part of the commentary. Not that Phil didn't do not that Phil made them boring. It was just a boring game altogether. He made it more exciting. And then they lost 3-0 to the late Wade Wilson and the Dallas Cowboys. So that was one of those games, 2 weeks where Jake Elliott tried to kick field goals and he couldn't.
Right.
So we'll start off with Phil here. What was your impression of commentating the highlights for the BTFL?
In a few words, it was definitely a blast. It's something I've had a little bit of experience with, not so much as say Nick has, but it was enjoyable. I love the game itself. I have it for the Nintendo Switch. It's just the simplicity, and at the same time the way that the game can be complex some of the time. It's just a really fun game to commentate. Obviously, commentating the Eagles games and most of the Buccaneer games. Another team I'm a fan of that particular season, that 0-2 squad. Knowing the players, knowing most of the players anyway, but learning others, and you take it upon yourself to then research that player, and you learn more about the game when you do stuff like this. So overall, enjoyable experience. I look forward to the playoff games because as some of these games can be, as in real life, can be blowouts. I don't really see that in the case of a lot of these playoff games. Because when every team has talent, most of the teams in this list have won a Super Bowl or is considered one of the greatest teams anyway. There's talent all over the field. There's guys you want to watch play. So I enjoyed it. It was definitely a lot of fun, and hopefully there's more to come.
Yeah. And finally Nick, I'll start this off, who was he's one of the reasons why I did this in the first place, because of his DSFL, and I was a huge fan of it. I remember a long time ago when he first started doing the DSFL, like back in 2009 or 2010, I was like, damn, it'd be really cool if I could do this. It'd be really awesome. And then I was like, I don't have enough time.
I don't know how I got the time to do it, and it just is a very consuming deal, but it also is incredibly rewarding. And I have just in the back of my mind ideas, and Phil has helped me with this as well, for another DSFL series, and something that I believe I may just debut this year. It's just such a blast. I second everything that Phil said. Something you didn't ask, but I'll just say it anyways. This BTFL playoff series is going to be very entertaining, I believe. And I just had this gut feeling that if the Eagles and Steelers, that BTFL bowl that we believe will be the matchup, if there are any of those two teams that go out, I think out of both conferences, I think Chicago would give Philadelphia their biggest test. I think the Bears have a shot to make it. And out of the AFC, I think, as you mentioned, a close game the first meeting, Indianapolis could really give Pittsburgh a challenge and could potentially uproot the Steelers and make the BTFL Bowl. So those are two things that I think could end up happening, and we don't know for sure, so we'll find out.
No, we don't, but that's the beauty of the playoffs. You start out 0-0. all of these teams are spectacular. They played well during their respective season, and they're trying to prove who's going to be the granddaddy of all of the NFL franchises in the BTFL, and they're all trying to get into the BTFL Tecmo Super Bowl. Any last second words for you guys before we send off?
I have one quick thing, I guess, is that obviously Nick had mentioned that, and you mentioned also that this league kind of started from Nick's original creation with Dream Season Football League, and that's kind of how me and Nick became acquainted with each other. I remember finding the videos on YouTube and messaging him and being like, "Hey, I like what you do. If you need help with anything, I'd be willing to help." And that's kind of how our friendship started. And similar to me and you, Hank, it's through YouTube. So it's cool that three people from 3 different parts of the country can come together, and along with the other people who have helped you with this. That where you are, it's just one of those the internet is great situations where people can come together on a project like this that's purely for fun, purely for enjoyment, and everyone can get have the fun and enjoyment out of it. And I think that's the end of the day. What we'll look back. Hopefully, there's another year of this. Hopefully, Nick does another one. But in general, we can still say we did it start to finish, and we all did it together.
Exactly, and that's the most important thing, because I could have done this all by myself, and it probably wouldn't have been as fulfilling as if you guys hadn't asked me if you could do it, or I hadn't asked you guys if you could do it. I don't know which one came first, the chicken or the egg. And especially because Josh and Ricky and DJ, they have some busy schedules. They weren't as available, but I'm glad that you guys were, because you guys added some really good commentary, and it just made it a lot cooler for me to just it made me excited to put the project out week in and week out.
Yeah, it certainly was a lot of fun to do it. Thank you, Hank, for giving us this opportunity all year.
You're welcome.
Phil mentioned it's about bringing guys together, which is awesome. The other thing that makes these series cool is that I was about negative 17 years old when the Pittsburgh Steelers were the greatest team for that year in '78. So I obviously didn't get to see half of these teams even play, and it's cool to see all these stories develop in these teams that I would have never seen. So
exactly.
The cool part about these series is that you get these stories that you otherwise would have never known, and that's what makes this so special, along with seeing just kind of the nerd in you and the nerd of all of us.
Exactly.
What was the greatest team ever? And I guess at the end
we'll
of
find
these,
out.
we have an idea, but we don't know for sure.
We'll find out. It's one of these 12 teams will have the bragging rights as the granddaddy of all of the NFL teams. So that's all we have here. Check out the playoffs for the BTFL. I think the wild card game will probably air Saturday or whenever we can get it all done. Planning on finishing it all by the Sunday before all the NFL games. So that's all we have. Hope you guys enjoyed the commentary and the preview for the playoffs. And we're signing off. Good night, everybody.